Good morning, everybody. My modest task over the next 10 minutes or so is to set out the forces that are shaping a new world, the challenges they create for the travel industry and us as leaders, so no pressure there then. When I was thinking about what to say, I thought of the Bob Dylan song, "The Times They Are A-Changing," as the subtitle or maybe the theme tune for this session, but then it didn't really seem to go far enough. It didn't seem to capture the real revolution that's going on. There was another song that was written about 300 years ago called "The World Turned Upside Down," which really seemed to get closer to the heart of what's going on. That song was actually written by dissenters who were very unhappy when the Puritan Parliament tried to abolish Christmas, or at least the bits of Christmas that are fun, the eating and the drinking and the caroling. So we can watch for that one coming down in the next wave of austerity. But actually, the song went beyond Christmas. It entered the folk tradition to stand for a whole era of religious and social and political upheaval. And that upheaval was sort of fueled by a proliferation of tracts, you know, the political blogs of the day, which were themselves made possible by printing and the growth in literacy. And you know, it's interesting to me that so many of these periods of big change in the human cycle are characterized by a change in information technology. And you can go back to the 9th century, where moving from papyrus to paper had the same impact on the Islamic empire. And I think the internet is really one of those moments which is going to really turn everything around. So where to start? I guess when it comes to disruptive forces, we're spoiled for choice, and we could spend a day on each of these. Population growth, pressure on resources, political instability, rather more positively, technology, connectedness. You know, we could argue about which is the most disruptive, and we could be here for 2 days on any of them. And of course, each of these isn't just immensely powerful in its own right. They all interact with each other and create a very dynamic situation. So, I don't know, medical technology will enable people to live longer, which is good, but that puts pressure on resources, and the government has to spend more out of the current account, and therefore there's less to invest in infrastructure, like airports. And that keeps, you know, the recession prolonged and so forth. So everything is connected to something else. I'm not going to try and cover all of these. You'll be pleased to hear, A, because it's way beyond my ability and it would take too long. So what I've done is just pick 3 subjects that are interesting to me to you know, get us into the right frame of mind for the sessions that are to come. The first of those is the economy. It's the shift of wealth from the old to the new economies. These are the current IMF GDP projections for this year. Now, this isn't news, I know, but the impacts of it are news, and I think they're being felt every day. I always sort of resist, you know, the reduction of human beings to sort of economic man, to sort of homo economicus, where all we are is a bunch of consumer desires or production units. I think there's a lot more to life than that, and travel can maybe open up those new worlds. But GDP does matter. It matters at a national level and at an individual level in people's standards of living. And we are going backwards in relative terms. You know, the center of gravity is moving inexorably to the east, and we are firmly rooted in the west. So I guess the question is, you know, are we prepared to settle for a kind of genteel poverty, you know, like the aristocrat who lives in an amazing stately home but actually can't afford the running repairs on the roof? Or are we going to kickstart ourselves into a new phase of economic growth? And I would say that the industries that can lead that are actually, the leaders of them are sitting in the room today, whether it's data management, communications, marketing, and of course, travel. These are all amazing growth opportunities for the future. But we have to ask ourselves, what resources do we need? What physical resources, infrastructure, but also what human resources and even psychological resources we need to take advantage of that? And how do we mobilize ourselves and others, and I think particularly of Her Majesty's government, to help provide them? The other big question, of course, that comes out when you see this picture is, where are the new markets that we'll be selling into? You know, I think the UK has been very successful in growing mass tourism for a domestic market, and increasingly now we have to look to export our abilities, our talents, our systems, to find the new growth markets. And those are questions not just for our industry, but for all industries in the UK. The second area I wanted to touch on, which brings us very close to the heart of this convention, is connectedness. And I venture here with great trepidation to talk about the internet, because I know we've got some real experts in the room. But I heard an interview the other day on the radio with a gentleman called Joe Kraus. And Joe Kraus, as some of you will know, was an early internet pioneer and set up an early search company called Excite. And it was very successful. Early 2000s, it was valued at about $5 billion. Next year, it had disappeared. It had been wiped out by Google, basically. And Joe Kraus was interviewed and said, well, why? What happened? What went wrong? What did Google get right that you didn't get right? And after a few sort of rueful comments that being early is being wrong in the internet, which was interesting, he talked about something called the long tail. This is my graphic, so forgive me, but I'll try and explain it. On the vertical axis, you've got the frequency, number of people sort of hitting a particular site. And on the horizontal one is popularity. It's the most popular on the left going to the less popular on the right. And he said when they looked at their distribution, what they saw was that the top 10 were incredibly popular, thousands times more people hitting Britney Spears and NFL and sex than the 100th or the 1,000th most popular site. But that together, those top 10 only accounted for about 3% of the total volume. And he said there is this very long tail on the internet, and what they couldn't figure out is how you make money out of this long tail along the bottom of a large number of relatively low frequency hit sites. And he said what Google figured out was that these are micro markets, that what you're looking at is a world where you have millions of markets of a dozen rather than a dozen markets of millions. And that phrase has just stuck with me, and I think in applying it to travel, what does that mean in a world of millions of markets of a dozen? How do you identify them as a market? How do you reach them? And what kind of product are they going to want in the future? We've got a session later on in the program about product design and mass customization, which was also a topic of this interview. And mass customization, for the uninitiated, is taking the economies of scale of mass production, but putting an intelligent front end on so you can deliver much more bespoke service and product to the customer. And it's been around for quite a while in other industries, and some will say, well, that's what travel agents have been doing all the time. But it's not really, I don't think our industry has really quite embraced it as a concept. And they had another guru, another Joe as it happened, Joe Pine, saying, the thing about mass customization is the customer doesn't want choice. The customer just wants what he wants. And that's a pretty profound thing. The customer doesn't want choice, because we've been very good at giving the customer loads of choice, thousands of hotels, thousands of options, but that's not what they want. They want just what they want. So, a very big change, and are we ready to meet that demand? The other thing he said, actually, which was interesting to me, was that in mass customization, what the customer gets is an experience, not a transaction. So it's an opportunity to really build a more deep relationship with them if we really have the technology and the marketing skills to embrace that. The third area I just wanted to touch on, which sort of brings it together a bit about wealth and a bit about connectedness, is humans, human beings, and in particular Generation Y. Generation Y are people born late 70s to mid 90s, so in their 20s, 30s, 35. And this was prompted by an article someone sent me from the Huffington Post about Generation Y. And what the author said was that as a generation, they are, not to put too fine a point on it, unhappy. And he set out this sort of mathematical equation, it's quite simple really, that happiness is the sort of difference between reality and expectations. And he said as a generation, Generation Y have got very high expectations, and that the reality isn't meeting them. And those expectations come around because a number of things. One, they've got the same consumerism desires that we all have, except more. He says, where the parents wanted a nice lawn, they want a nice lawn and flowers. So that's the first point. The second is that each of them has been brought up to think they're special, which is great, but you can't all be special. It's a sort of contradiction in terms, as he points out, and as life goes on, they realize that that specialness is kind of harder to, it's not materializing, it's harder to find. And the third is that because of social media, everyone else seems happier than they are, which makes them even more depressed. So I mean, it's a rather gloomy picture, but the thing that sort of caught my attention was the idea which he talks about of fulfillment, and particularly fulfillment through your job and your career. And he cited an index, it was a Google index, of course, about searches, and you could see that the number of people putting in secure career was trending steeply down, but the number of people putting in fulfilling career was heading in the opposite direction, and people are looking for a lot from work now, not just pay and a roof over your head and warm, central heating in winter, but it's got to deliver on all of your life goals. And so I guess the challenge for us as leaders and as employers is, have we thought about the work journey, the way we structure work, and are we going to be able to capture the energy of the Generation Ys and enable them to achieve that fulfillment? Or are they simply going to be unfulfilled or have to go somewhere else to find what they're looking for from work? So 3 very open-ended questions there to kick the convention off. I don't think, no 2 people in the room would choose the same 3 disruptive forces if you had to say which were the most influential, and they certainly wouldn't choose mine, I'm sure of that. So it's a bit like desert island discs. So feel free to agree or disagree with what I've said. It's there to think about. I go back to the beginning and the Bob Dylan song, "The Times They Are Changing," which is, of course, a great song. There are some siren warnings in that about, the first ones now will later be last, and you better start swimming or you'll sink like a stone. So it's kind of got that. But of course, the song became an anthem for change in the 60s, and those changes blew away lots of old cobwebs, and they set people free politically and intellectually and emotionally. And I think we've got a similar opportunity now. So I think it's easy to be scared or paralyzed in the face of these forces of change, but we shouldn't be. We should embrace them and make something new. So thank you very much.